Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Huff, huff, where am I? Ethan Cole jolted upright in bed, his chest heaving. Wait, didn't I get my head blown off? His eyes darted around the unfamiliar room. Clothes were scattered across the floor, black stockings, a bra, and a flight attendant's uniform. Beside him, a woman slept soundly, her chest rising and falling. Recognition hit him like a brick. Isn't this the flight attendant I hooked up with a month ago? Panicking, he grabbed his phone. The glowing screen read, 12:01 a.m., November 1st. Ethan froze. His mind went blank. Slowly, he stumbled into the bathroom. The man in the mirror looked back at him with clear eyes and smooth, youthful skin. Alive. With trembling hands, he ripped off the condom, still clinging to him. Did I come back to life? Back to 15 days before the apocalypse? A cold mechanical voice answered his unspoken thought. Ding. Congratulations, lucky one. You've been granted a one-time rebirth in an SSS-level spatial storage ring. A ruby ring shimmered into existence on his finger, glowing brighter and brighter until Ethan was forced to shut his eyes. When he opened them again, a vast starry expanse stretched across his consciousness, an endless void capable of holding anything. His heart pounded. A cheat ability, a storage ring? This is the ultimate survival tool. Ding. Please choose your faction, human or zombie. Ethan blinked. Faction choice? And I still have 15 days before it begins, which means I can prepare in advance. As a human, he could stockpile food, medicine, and weapons, using his knowledge of the future to dominate the apocalypse. That was the obvious path, the safe path. But Ethan's lips curled into a grin. This time, I choose zombie. Idiot. Far above, God slammed his fist against the arm of his throne. His favorite coffee mug, painted with world's best God, shattered on the floor. I should have given this rebirth to someone else, he muttered with regret. 3 days later, at a slaughterhouse, workers hauled meat into trucks. Beside the carcasses sat hundreds of jars filled with bright red blood, gleaming like liquid rubies under the morning sun. Big Frank, what's the boss doing? The farm was running fine. Why slaughter over 100,000 animals all of a sudden? And what's with all this blood? Another whispered. Frank scowled. Don't ask questions. Just follow orders. The men nodded uneasily. Everyone had noticed something off about their boss lately. He was stricter, colder. Yesterday, one worker dropped a bit of ash on a cutting board, and the way Ethan looked at him, it was like death itself. Chill. He's coming. A tall young man strode into the yard. His white shirt was immaculate, his features sharp enough to cut glass. Handsome, flawless, and terrifyingly cold. Foreman Frank rushed forward. Boss, the 9,600 cows for 1,000 turkeys, 20,000 pigs, 50,000 chickens, and 7,000 sheep, all processed. Ethan gave a single nod. Settle their pay. Frank smiled, extending a hand, but Ethan only stared at it with icy disdain. Embarrassed, Frank quickly pulled back. Everyone knew Ethan despised physical contact. Moments later, the workers departed in their bus, leaving the yard empty. Ethan swept a hand through the air. The mountains of meat and jars of blood vanished instantly into his ring. Inside the spatial space, time was frozen. Nothing would rot or spoil. Blood and flesh, the foundation of zombie evolution. Unlike humans, who hoarded canned food and water, Ethan stockpiled meat. In his past life, he had watched humanity crumble. People fighting over scraps of bread, murdering for a sip of clean water. But as a zombie, none of that mattered. For him, blood and flesh meant growth, strength, and eventual dominion. This time, he wouldn't just survive the apocalypse. He would rise as the first zombie king. His phone buzzed. Boss, Nina, his supermarket manager, reported nervously. The 100,000 frozen steaks, 50,000 chicken wings, and 30,000 meatballs are here. Good. Keep ordering. Contact every supplier in the country. If overseas shipments can arrive in 10 days, place orders with them too. What? Boss, we're already out of capital. We can't even cover deposits. I'll get the money. You just keep buying. Understood. Nina hung up, confused and worried. Ethan closed his phone. His assets, farm, supermarket, estate, properties, all now rested inside his ring. His cash reserves were thin, but money would come. One way or another. 12 days left, he murmured. I need more meat. More blood. Just then, 2 cars appeared on the road outside. A flashy Maserati Quattroporte and a beat-up Honda Civic. Thugs spilled out of the Civic, tattoos covering their arms, hair dyed in neon colors. Their boss stepped from the Maserati, a bald man with a gold chain and a smug grin. Warren, a developer who had long coveted Ethan's land. Ethan, long time no see, Warren called, strutting forward. Ethan's lips curved into a cold smile. Out of money, and someone comes to deliver it. Hungry, and someone brings food. Warren swaggered into Ethan's yard, a pack of tattooed thugs trailing behind him. Skulls, cobras, and flames inked across their arms. Their dyed hair and cocky strides screamed intimidation. Ethan didn't flinch. Calmly leaning against the porch, he greeted, "Hey, Warren." Warren gave a polite smile, masking his arrogance. "You already know why I'm here. Thought more about my offer for this land." To his surprise, Ethan nodded casually. "Yeah, I'll sell. Same price you offered." For a moment, Warren froze. Even his thugs glanced at one another in confusion. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. "You're serious?" Warren asked, uncertain. "Dead serious," Ethan replied. "No reason to let my little farm block your big plans." Relief and pride swelled in Warren's chest. Finally, this stubborn kid had come to his senses. "Ha ha, excellent. Let's get the contract signed." An assistant stepped forward immediately. Clearly, they had come prepared. Pages were spread out across a folding table. Ethan didn't hesitate. He sat, pen in hand, and signed his name one page after another. The farm's land was worth at least $20 million on the market. Warren's grin grew wider with every signature. Still, he couldn't stop himself from asking. So, why the sudden change of heart? Why sell now? "Because I need money," Ethan said flatly, not looking up. That answer lit a spark in Warren's mind. He wasn't just a developer. He was also a loan shark. And here stood the perfect mark. "Need money, huh?" His tone softened, almost generous. "If you're short, I might be able to help." Ethan lifted his eyes, studying the broad, scarred face of the bald man. For once, Warren's usual smugness looked almost like kindness. Inwardly, Ethan chuckled. "Not only buying my farm, but offering me more cash? How considerate." "Your help came at the perfect time," Ethan said lightly. "We're both going to make a fortune." Warren laughed, booming with confidence. "Of course, but you know my rules. Interest isn't cheap, and I'll need collateral." "No problem. How about a supermarket, an estate, and a penthouse?" Warren's pulse quickened. He knew those assets well. Prime properties worth tens of millions. The supermarket alone was a gold mine. "In that case, I can lend you $80 million, Warren declared proudly. "Deal." Ethan agreed instantly. Contracts, promissory notes, property deeds, it was all wrapped up within the hour. Ethan now held $100 million in cash. Warren strutted back to his Maserati, smugness dripping from every step. His thugs piled in after him. Ethan stood at the entrance of the farm, watching the cars disappear. His gaze was calm, almost amused. When the world ends, what will Warren think? Oh, maybe nothing at all. After the deal, Ethan began stripping the farm. Every generator, every solar panel, every useful machine was packed into his storage ring. Even the digger went in. Nothing was wasted. He was meticulous, clean, obsessive. Even as a zombie, he was unlike the rest. Rational, calculating, and fanatically tidy. His phone buzzed. "Lola, babe, my birthday's next month. Where are you getting me?" Ethan stared at the message. Lola, the campus beauty. Sweet on the surface, rotten underneath. Once, in his loneliness, he'd fallen for her charms. "The gift's already ready," he typed back, his eyes cold. "Thanks, babe. The gift doesn't matter. What matters is your little swimmer's red heart. A humorless smile tugged at Ethan's lips. You'll find out soon enough. Memories from his previous life cut deep. The desperate message Lola sent during the apocalypse. His reckless attempt to save her. His infection. And worst of all, the scene he found when he reached her dorm. Her betrayal had been absolute. This time, Ethan had a surprise plan for her and her new lovers. 12 days remained. 12 days until the world burned. Ethan returned inside, eyes sweeping the walls. He paused at a photograph. Children gathered at the orphanage where he'd grown up. His younger self stood beside a girl clutching a teddy bear, Mia. She had pale skin, bright eyes, and a smile that once made him feel less alone. But Mia had vanished years ago, locked away in a psychiatric hospital after biting off another child's face. Ethan had never seen her again. Still, her crescent moon smile lingered in his mind. He carefully tucked the photo into his ring. By evening, Ethan arrived at a supermarket. Trucks lined the loading dock, workers unloading crates. Nina, the warehouse manager, ran over with a ledger in hand, sweat beading on her forehead. "Boss, today's delivery list. Can you check it?" Ethan flipped through the pages, then glanced at her. "It's late. Go home and rest." Nina blinked, surprised, before smiling gratefully. "Thanks, boss. But I've got class tomorrow, so I'll be late coming in." "You don't need to come back," Ethan said calmly. Her face fell. Did I do something wrong? No. The supermarket's closing for now. She lowered her head, disappointment plain in her voice. "I see. I'll pay you double for this month. Go." Nina's eyes softened with gratitude, though her shoulders slumped as she walked away. Ethan watched her leave, his expression unchanged. The world was ending soon, and when it did, everything would be reset. Ethan decided to close the supermarket, let all the employees go, and take down the store sign. For the next few days, his job was to receive deliveries. He contacted major suppliers, slaughterhouses, and farm owners, and soon, trucks were arriving one after another, dropping off supplies. Most of the deliveries were raw meat, but there were also some everyday cleaning products and household items. To Ethan, these supplies were more important than food. "Mr. Cole, your delivery's here." A few UPS drivers started unloading boxes into the supermarket. Before long, a small mountain of cardboard boxes had formed. These boxes were heavy because they contained weapons Ethan had ordered on the dark web. 600 compound bows, 700 crossbows, and thousands of knives, machetes, and other blades. In the early days of the apocalypse, these weapons would be incredibly effective. Sure, Ethan was about to turn into a zombie, but as a zombie with ambition, using weapons didn't seem too unreasonable, right? Time flew by, and before he knew it, the day before the apocalypse game had arrived. Ethan had nearly spent his entire $100 million budget, but since he had only paid deposits, his purchasing power far exceeded that amount. He had practically cornered the market, clearing out the inventories of several major suppliers. It was now evening, and the last rays of the setting sun streamed into the empty supermarket. All the shelves had been cleared, and Ethan had stored all the supplies in his spatial storage ring. Tomorrow morning, the apocalypse game would officially begin, and Ethan was ready to stop being human. Still, he picked up a mop and cleaned the supermarket until it was spotless. Keeping things clean had become a habit for him. Ethan stood by the window, looking out at the street. The road was still busy with cars, their headlights flickering in the evening rush hour. People hurried along, eager to get home. Elementary school kids, guided by a crossing guard, lined up to cross the street, their backpacks bouncing with each step. They laughed and chatted as they walked, their voices filled with joy. Parents stood nearby, smiling warmly and waving to their waiting children. Everything seemed normal, just an ordinary evening. But Ethan knew that by tomorrow, all of this would be gone. At this moment, he felt an unusual calm, savoring the last bit of peace. Suddenly, the metal shutter made a screeching sound as someone violently pulled it up from the outside. The sunset light spilled in, revealing 3 figures. "Hey boss, I'm starving. How about giving me something to eat?" The leader, a young man with fiery red hair, spoke with a cocky tone. He was a local troublemaker, always hanging around to mooch food and drinks. Shop owners hated dealing with guys like him. They'd show up every few days, causing trouble and driving away customers. So most business owners would just give them something to avoid seeing. Ethan didn't even bother to look up. He replied flatly, "The store's closed. I've got nothing for you." "What?" The punks looked around at the empty shelves, clearly surprised. Just a few days ago, the supermarket had been stocking up like crazy. How could it suddenly be out of business? The store's really closed? So, does that mean we won't see that cute warehouse girl anymore? One of the lackeys asked, scratching his head in disappointment. "Yo, Red, what do we do now?" Another lackey whispered, clearly unsure what to do next. The red-haired leader sized Ethan up, a sly grin forming on his face. "Boss, even if your store's closed, you can't just let us starve, right? How about lending us some cash so we can grab a bite?" Ethan didn't want these punks ruining his last bit of peace, so he casually pulled out a wad of $100 bills from his pocket and tossed it in front of them. The stack was easily over $1,000. To someone about to turn into a zombie, money was no different from scrap paper. Holy crap, the red-haired guy's eyes lit up. He hadn't expected Ethan to be so generous. He figured Ethan was scared of him, which is why he handed over so much money. "You're not too bad, man. You know how to play the game." The two lackeys were just as excited, feeling like they were really making it big by hanging out with the red-haired guy. On this street, they could walk into any store and the owner would hand over cash. This was exactly what they were in it for. "Red, we got it made. Yeah, stick with the boss, and we'll never have to worry about food or drinks again." "Ha." The red-haired guy waved his hand, signaling his crew to leave with him. The red-haired guy laughed smugly, but maybe he laughed a little too hard because a small bug flew straight into his mouth. Tooey. He coughed violently and spat out a thick glob of phlegm, which landed right on the floor Ethan had just cleaned until it was spotless. He glanced at the sticky mess on the floor, completely unconcerned, as if it were no big deal. "Hold on." Ethan's voice suddenly broke the silence in the supermarket. The red-haired guy and his two lackeys stopped in their tracks, turning around to look at Ethan with puzzled expressions. "What's up? You got something else to say?" The redhead raised an eyebrow, his tone laced with impatience. Ethan's cold gaze fell on the spit, his voice calm but carrying a chilling edge. "The floor's dirty." He began walking toward the red-haired guy, his steps steady, his eyes filled with a cold, unsettling intensity. The redhead froze for a moment, then burst out laughing. "I just spit on the floor, man. You're really going to get worked up over that?" His two lackeys joined in, crossing their arms and smirking at Ethan, clearly not taking him seriously. After all, when they had asked for money earlier, Ethan had handed it over without hesitation. Why would he suddenly get mad over something so trivial? But the laughter stopped abruptly in the next second. A flash of cold steel appeared in Ethan's hand, and in one swift motion, a sharp hunting knife sliced through the air, heading straight for the redhead's neck. Thwack! The blade cut cleanly, and the red-haired guy's head dropped to the floor with a dull thud. His eyes were wide open, still frozen in that smug grin, but now twisted and stiff. His mouth hung slightly open, as if he wanted to say something, but only blood gushed from his severed throat. Thud! His body collapsed heavily to the ground, blood quickly pooling across the floor. He never understood, even in his final moments, why Ethan had suddenly killed him so ruthlessly. The two remaining lackeys were completely paralyzed with fear. Their Red, the guy they had always looked up to, had been decapitated in an instant. "Oh my God! Oh my God! What the hell?" One of them stammered, his voice trembling, his face pale as a sheet, his legs shaking uncontrollably. They were just small-time street punks, used to bullying the weak. They had never seen anything this brutal before. The only thought in their minds now was to run for their lives. Ethan's expression remained cold, as if what had just happened was nothing more than a trivial matter. His eyes showed no emotion, as if killing was just another routine task for him. Please don't kill me. I'm sorry," one of the lackeys stammered, dropping to his knees, his voice thick with terror. "Why, yeah, we won't say a word. Just let us go." The other one quickly chimed in, his eyes filled with desperate pleading. Ethan smiled faintly, a small, almost imperceptible curve at the corner of his mouth. Go ahead. I won't kill you. Hearing this, the two punks felt like they had been granted a pardon from death. They scrambled to their feet and bolted for the exit, stumbling over each other in their rush to escape, terrified that if they moved too slowly, they'd lose their lives. But they had barely made it a few steps when Ethan calmly raised a crossbow, already loaded and aimed at the back of one of their heads. Thwip! An arrow whizzed through the air, striking the lackey square in the back of the skull, pinning him to the ground instantly. Ah! The remaining lackey turned around in horror, seeing his friend's body crumple to the floor, an arrow sticking out of the back of his head, blood pouring out. His face turned ghostly white, and his legs nearly gave out beneath him. You promised, man. You promised, he cried, his voice shaking, eyes filled with despair. Ethan didn't respond. He simply pulled back the crossbow string again, another arrow already aimed at the man's forehead. Thwack! Another dull thud echoed through the supermarket as the arrow pierced through the man's skull, ending his life in an instant. His body collapsed to the floor, and once again, the supermarket fell into a deathly silence. Ethan lowered the crossbow and walked over to the bodies, glancing down at the three corpses. He muttered to himself, the crossbow's power isn't bad. With a casual wave of his hand, the three bodies vanished, stored away in his spatial storage ring. To him, these corpses were no different from the other supplies he had gathered. In the world of the coming apocalypse, both the living and the dead were nothing more than food. Ethan returned to his place. It was a towering skyscraper, and his home was on the 42nd floor, right at the top. The apartment was spotless, so clean it was almost impressive. Every item was meticulously arranged, and the minimalist design gave the whole space a refreshing, uncluttered feel. The windows were reinforced with sturdy steel bars, perfectly sealed and unbreakable. This was to protect him from the flying, mutated beasts that had started appearing in the apocalypse, capable of launching sudden attacks. On the roof, solar panels had already been installed. Even though Ethan was about to turn into a zombie, electricity was still an essential part of his life. While he would lose his human physical abilities, his mind would remain intact. To pass the time, he could still watch TV, play video games, and scroll through his phone. Through these devices, he could stay informed about the outside world and keep up with the latest developments in the apocalypse. Everything was ready. The countdown to the end of the world had begun. The long night finally passed, and the morning light slowly spread across the land. Ethan remembered clearly that the apocalypse would begin at 8 a.m. He glanced at the clock on the wall. The hands pointed to 7:59. Only 1 minute left. He walked to the window and looked down at the street below. Outside, everything seemed normal. Cars filled the roads, and people were walking around, chatting and laughing as if nothing was wrong. The second hand of the clock ticked, slowly aligning with the minute hand. A new era was about to begin. 8 a.m. Suddenly, the once bright sky was covered by an eerie red glow. The sun turned blood red, as if the entire world had been stained with an ominous hue. People on the street looked up, confusion written all over their faces. Why is the sun turning red? Is this some kind of astronomical event? Hurry, take a picture and post it on Facebook. Just then, a virtual system interface suddenly appeared in front of everyone, as if reality had instantly turned into a video game. Ding! Please choose. Join the humans or the zombies. Most people froze, staring blankly at the options in front of them, unsure of what to do. After a moment of hesitation, someone slowly reached out and selected the human option. The apocalypse game will officially start in 30 seconds. Please make your choice quickly. If there aren't enough players in the zombie faction, the system will randomly assign participants. The cold, mechanical voice echoed in everyone's ears like a countdown to their doom. Panic set in. People hurriedly chose human, desperately clinging to the last shred of safety they could find. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The countdown hit 0. Chaos erupted. People frantically tried to confirm their choices. But in the next moment, many of them blacked out as if struck down by an invisible force, instantly losing consciousness. On the streets, cars veered out of control, crashing into one another. Bang! Crash! Windows shattered, glass flying everywhere, and the streets descended into chaos. Panic spread like wildfire as people's expressions grew more frantic. "Honey, what's wrong? Wake up!" On the sidewalk, a woman desperately shook the man who had collapsed beside her. But when the man opened his eyes, his face had twisted into something monstrous. Without warning, he lunged at her, sinking his teeth into her neck. "Ah!" Her scream tore through the air as blood quickly soaked her clothes. Her body convulsed violently, her eyes rolling back as her life drained away in an instant. Similar scenes played out all over the streets. "Monsters! There are monsters! There's zombies! Run! Mom, please wake up!" Screams, cries, and roars echoed through the city, plunging it into utter chaos. Ethan stood by the window, and everything went black. He lost consciousness. When he woke up again, he was no longer human. He opened his mouth, but all that came out was a low, raspy groan. His ability to speak was completely gone. "Just as I thought." Ethan mused silently. His body had undergone a massive transformation, and many of his functions were lost. Even the 10-inch dick he had once been so proud of was now unresponsive. "Looks like I'll need to evolve before I can get that back," he thought. He turned to look at the mirror in the living room. His reflection hadn't changed much, except for his skin, which had turned pale as paper, devoid of any color, giving him a sickly, eerie appearance. As a zombie, his limbs were stiff, his movements slow, and he had almost no sense of pain. At this point, he was slower than an average human. If he were to classify himself based on the levels from his previous life, he was now just a lowly D-class zombie, a rookie. However, some of his senses had become sharper. His hearing and sense of smell were now incredibly acute. His nails had hardened into sharp, iron-like blades, and his teeth were strong enough to tear through flesh with ease. Ethan picked up an apple from the table and took a small bite. The once familiar sweetness and crispness were now tasteless, like chewing on a piece of dry wax. "Disgusting," he muttered under his breath, frowning slightly. Worse the apple didn't satisfy his hunger. Instead, it only intensified the emptiness inside him. His stomach churned, craving something far more primal, flesh. Ethan slowly walked toward the dining table. Despite his stiff movements, he still carried himself with his usual grace. He picked up a pristine white napkin and carefully tied it around his neck, as if preparing for a fine dining experience. From his spatial storage ring, he retrieved a slab of fresh, raw beef and placed it on a plate. Then, he picked up a knife and fork, meticulously cutting the beef into small pieces, just as he would have in a high-end restaurant. Each slice was precise and deliberate, as though he were still the gentleman dining in luxury. He speared a piece of raw beef with his fork and slowly brought it to his mouth. His teeth easily tore through the meat, and the blood burst in his mouth, carrying a sweetness he had never tasted before. This is what I need," Ethan thought to himself. The taste of raw meat was unexpectedly exquisite, far surpassing any cooked food he had ever eaten. Outside, the world was still in chaos. The streets were filled with screams, cries, and the growls of zombies. But Ethan paid no attention to any of it. He was focused on the meal in front of him, savoring each bite of raw beef. As he continued to eat, he could feel energy building up inside him, and his body was quietly changing. The more he ate, the more agile his limbs became, and his strength steadily increased. The steel knife and fork in his hands, once sturdy and unyielding, now felt fragile. With just a little pressure, he could easily bend them. But he didn't stop. He kept eating, plate after plate, as if his stomach were a bottomless pit that could never be filled. Time passed without him noticing, and the streets outside gradually grew quieter. The cries of humans faded away, replaced by the low growls and snarls of zombies. The city had fallen. Only a few survivors remained, clinging to life. Ethan, however, was still lost in his own world, focused solely on the delicious meal before him. He ate a total of 15 plates of beef before he finally felt somewhat full. But even then, his stomach still craved more. The growth rate of zombies was astonishing, especially when they had access to plenty of flesh. Ethan could feel it. His body was rapidly recovering as he ate. His movements were becoming more fluid, and his strength was far beyond that of an ordinary person. He set down the knife and fork, untied the napkin from his neck, and moved with a smooth, graceful motion. After consuming so much meat, his body was no longer stiff, and his limbs were more flexible than they had been even before he became a zombie. Looks like I've leveled up, Ethan thought to himself. He estimated that he had now reached the level of a C-class zombie. While he was still far from the peak, he was much stronger than when he had first mutated as a D-class. He stood up and walked over to the window, gazing down at the scene below. The streets were a wreck, littered with broken glass, bloodstains, and scattered limbs. Zombies roamed the streets, searching for new prey. Some zombies gathered in small groups, crouching over human corpses, fighting over the remains like wild animals, growling and snarling as they protected their food. Occasionally, he saw survivors jumping from high buildings, trying to escape the nightmare of the apocalypse. But their bodies were quickly devoured by the zombies below, leaving nothing behind, not even bones. The sky was still bathed in that eerie red glow, the sun stained with blood, casting a desolate light over the apocalyptic ruins. Ethan watched it all, feeling nothing. None of this concerned him. He leaned lightly against the windowsill, enjoying the breeze as he picked up a glass of red wine, swirling the liquid gently. The deep red wine swirled in the glass, mirroring the blood-red sky outside. He took a sip, then picked up a white towel and elegantly wiped the corners of his mouth. No matter how the world changed, elegance would never go out of style. Ding! Suddenly, Ethan's phone buzzed, and a Facebook notification popped up on the screen. He picked it up and saw the message was from Lola. "Hey babe, are you okay, Ethan? There's zombies everywhere, and I'm so scared. I'm really worried about you. Are you still alive?" Ethan's fingers glided across the screen as he typed back, "Yeah, I'm still alive." Lola immediately sent more messages after seeing his reply. "I'm trapped in my dorm, and I'm almost out of food. You got a lot of supplies, right? Can you bring some over and save me?" A strange smile crept across Ethan's face. Since he'd already turned into a zombie, that smile looked especially eerie. "Hang in there. I'll come by in a bit," he typed back. To Ethan, Lola wasn't just someone asking for help. She was fresh supplies he had stashed away. Of course, he planned to go find her, but not right now. The world outside was still dangerous. Even though he had eaten plenty of flesh and was far stronger than an average person, he wanted to wait a few more days. He wanted to get even stronger, just to be sure nothing could go wrong. Lola, of course, had no idea she was chatting with a zombie. "Babe, you have to come save me. I'm waiting for you. Love you." Lola sent her final message. Ethan didn't reply. He knew Lola wasn't exactly alone right now. She was in her dorm, having wild sex with 5 other guys. 2 of them were sucking on her breasts, one was pounding her from below, another was playing with her ass, and Lola was giving a blowjob to the guy standing in front of her. And yet, she still had the nerve to call him babe and send him those fake messages. Ethan let out a cold laugh and continued scrolling through the other messages on his phone. In the neighborhood group chat, cries for help were flooding in. "Neighbors, there's a zombie in the hallway, banging on my door. What do I do? Block the door. Don't let the zombie break in. I'm almost out of food. I can't hold out much longer. Everyone stay calm. Zombies aren't that strong. I just shot 1 dead. If you've killed a zombie, speak up. We need to band together and go out for supplies." Ethan stared at the messages, lost in thought. Even though he had turned into a zombie, he had no intention of attacking his neighbors. Flesh wasn't that tasty, and it didn't provide nearly as much energy as beef. He still had plenty of supplies, so there was no need to hunt down any living people. Of course, if anyone was dumb enough to mess with him, Ethan wouldn't hesitate to show them what true cruelty looked like. He was already planning his next move. Sure, humans could band together to fight zombies, but zombies could also unite. A powerful zombie king could lead thousands of zombies, coordinating attacks and hunting down prey. Ethan decided it was time to recruit a few zombie minions. Not to hunt, though. He just wanted them to guard his place, to make sure no one disturbed his peace. Ethan grabbed his keys and walked out the door. Low growls echoed through the hallway, signaling that zombies were wandering nearby. He didn't plan to go far, just find a few minions in this building. His standards weren't high. As long as they were somewhat clean, they'd do. Ethan walked into the stairwell. After descending one floor, he spotted a shadowy figure at the corner. Rayerg. A girl let out a low growl. She was a zombie too, but instead of attacking Ethan, there was a hint of fear in her eyes. She seemed to sense that Ethan was on a higher level than her, like a wolf encountering a tiger. The natural power imbalance kept her from making any sudden moves. Ethan recognized her. She was his downstairs neighbor, a high jumper before all this happened. Years of training had given her long, powerful legs. Even as a zombie, her movements were still agile, and she was just as fast as a regular human. And that was without having eaten any flesh yet. Looks like zombies retain some of their traits from when they were alive. Ethan thought the girl had potential. If trained properly, she could very well become a swift and agile zombie leader. She was wearing a pink t-shirt and jeans, her hair tied in a ponytail. Despite being a zombie, she still looked relatively clean and tidy. She'll do, Ethan decided. He pulled a frozen steak from his pocket and casually tossed it toward her. The female zombie was immediately drawn to the scent of meat. She dropped to her knees, tore open the packaging, and devoured it ravenously. After finishing the steak, her eyes showed not just fear, but also a hint of desire and respect. "Stick with me, and you'll get more meat," Ethan communicated to her through a mental signal. As a high-level zombie, he had the ability to control other zombies this way. The girl seemed to understand. She let out a few low growls before slowly bowing her head. This was a gesture of submission among zombies. And just like that, Ethan had his first follower. He continued wandering the hallway with the female zombie in tow. Before long, they encountered two more zombies with decent potential. One of them had been a WWE wrestler in life. Massive, muscular, the perfect example of a strength-based zombie. The other zombie didn't have any obvious physical advantages. He had been a brilliant young PhD, even winning a Nobel Prize before the outbreak. Ethan chose him because of the lingering intelligence in his eyes. He seemed more aware than the average zombie. If zombies' intelligence could be compared to that of dogs, this PhD zombie would definitely be a border collie. Aside from these two, none of the other zombies caught Ethan's eye. He led his 3 new recruits back to his apartment door, sizing them up. While they had potential, their current combat abilities were still no match for humans armed with weapons. If only you guys could use weapons, Ethan thought to himself. Suddenly, an idea struck him. Zombies weren't incapable of using weapons. They just hadn't been taught how. With a flick of his wrist, Ethan pulled 3 cookery knives from his spatial storage ring and tossed them onto the ground. The clattering of the blades hitting the floor immediately caught the zombies' attention, but they just stared at the knives, clearly unsure of what to do with them. Ethan sent a mental command, instructing them to pick up the knives. The zombies obeyed instantly. The wrestler zombie, in particular, grabbed the blade with his bare hand. SHHHK. The sharp edge sliced into his palm, blood dripping onto the floor. But since zombies feel little to no pain, he didn't react. Instead, he looked at Ethan proudly, as if showing off how obedient he was. "Idiot," Ethan sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Are you planning to hit people with a handle?" The PhD zombie, on the other hand, was much smarter. Following Ethan's instructions, he gripped the knife by the handle and swung it a few times in the air, quickly grasping the weapon's purpose. Ethan was pleased. He immediately ordered the other 2 zombies to follow the PhD's example. With a demonstration to guide them, the wrestler and the female zombie soon learned how to hold the knives properly. It was clear now, zombies could be trained, but only a stronger zombie leader had the authority to train them. In the days that followed, Ethan stayed home, living a reclusive life. His routine became simple and predictable. Eat meat and train his zombie minions. As time passed, the progress these zombies made was nothing short of astonishing. Not only had they fully mastered the use of cookery knives, but they had also learned how to handle crossbows. During these 3 days, Ethan consumed an enormous amount of flesh, digesting it at an incredible rate and absorbing a significant amount of energy. Roughly estimating, he had eaten the equivalent of at least 10 cows. His body was evolving rapidly, becoming stronger by the day. Now, Ethan's skin was as tough as a truck tire. A knife would only leave a faint white mark when dragged across it. Ordinary human weapons could no longer harm him. "My head feels kinda itchy, like something's about to grow out," Ethan muttered, swirling the wine glass in his hand as he gently rolled his neck. This sensation was a sign that he was evolving from a C rank to a B rank. Once he reached B rank, a crystal core would form inside his skull, significantly boosting his overall strength. He would also awaken a special ability. Every zombie's ability was different. Some were basic like rapid healing, super infection, or growing bone spikes. Others were more bizarre, like hallucination, dream invasion, or mind control. These strange abilities often caught enemies off guard, sometimes even killing them without a trace. Ethan wasn't sure what ability he would awaken. In his previous life, due to a lack of enough flesh, he had never evolved to such a high level. He hadn't even had the chance to show his potential before Lola's 5 boyfriends killed him. Now he took a refined sip of the blood in his glass, feeling the energy flow through his body. After a few days of experimentation, he concluded that beef tasted the best, followed by pork, with chicken coming in last. As for blood, cow's blood was undoubtedly the most delicious. It was like drinking a can of Red Bull. Every time he drank cow's blood, his cells became more active, his energy absorption sped up, and even his pale face would gain a slight flush of color. Bang! 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 Just as Ethan was leisurely enjoying his Red Bull, a series of heavy thuds echoed from the street outside. Thanks to his zombie-enhanced hearing, he easily picked up on the sounds. "What's going on out there?" He walked over to the window and leaned down to look. On the street below, a group of heavily armed humans was busy at work. Their arms were wrapped in newspaper, secured tightly with duct tape, clearly an attempt to prevent zombie bites. They were wielding all sorts of weapons, wrenches, crowbars, and even a frying pan. Leading them was a burly man, about 5 feet 11 inches and close to 220 pounds. He was holding a fire axe, swinging it forcefully at a locked metal shutter. Bang! 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 Each swing of the axe sent sparks flying, the deafening noise echoing through the street. That metal shutter was the entrance to the supermarket Ethan used to run. It was obvious these people had run out of food and were desperate enough to risk coming out to scavenge for supplies. This supermarket used to have a ton of stuff stocked up. "Once we break in, we won't have to worry about food and water anymore," the burly man shouted, his eyes wide with determination as he kept swinging the axe, not daring to stop. They knew that the loud noise would eventually attract zombies. "Big Tony, hurry up. The zombies are coming," one of the men yelled in panic. Sure enough, on the blood-stained, corpse-littered street, 7 or 8 zombies had already been drawn to the commotion. They let out low growls, charging at the group of humans with terrifying speed. These zombies, starved for a long time, had begun to rot, their hair almost completely gone. They looked like grotesque demons crawling straight out of hell. "Oh my God, this is terrifying," one of the men stammered, his legs trembling so badly he could barely stand. The burly leader gritted his teeth, his voice shaking as he barked. "Hold them off. I'm almost through the door." "All right, let's do this," another man shouted, raising his crowbar and charging at the oncoming zombies. The 4 men engaged in a fierce battle with the undead. These zombies were low-level, their movements stiff and sluggish, nowhere near as agile as the humans. One by one, they were taken down with headshots collapsing into pools of blood. But there were just too many of them. Zombies were pouring in from all directions, some even leaping off rooftops, swarming like a relentless tide. The men's stamina quickly drained. In a fight like this, An average person lasting 2 minutes was already a miracle. It hurts so bad. I've been bitten. Help me. The man who had been trembling earlier was now being viciously bitten on the hand by a zombie, his face contorted in agony. Jimmy, the others wanted to help, but they were already overwhelmed, barely able to fend for themselves. They all knew what a zombie bite meant. There was only one outcome, turning into one of them. Helpless, they could only watch as Jimmy was dragged down by 4 or 5 zombies, torn apart in seconds. His screams echoed through the empty street, chilling to the bone. Upstairs, Ethan took a casual sip of the blood in his glass, watching the scene unfold with a detached amusement, as if he were watching a dull play. He couldn't help but find it funny. These people were wasting their energy trying to break into his supermarket, completely unaware that he had already stored all the supplies in his spatial storage ring. Jimmy's screams soon faded, and as his body was devoured, the leader, Tony, suddenly grinned with excitement. The door's open. Get inside, quick! With a loud screech of metal, the shuttered door finally rolled up. The remaining men, hearing this, let out sighs of relief and rushed toward the entrance. But just as they were scrambling to safety, one of them was grabbed by a half-destroyed zombie lying on the ground. Thud! He fell hard, terror flooding his face as he desperately crawled toward the door. Guys, help me! The others, already inside the supermarket, quickly grabbed his arms, pulling with all their might. But the zombies were closing in fast, piling onto him one after another. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't pull him all the way in. To make matters worse, his body was now stuck under the shutter, preventing them from closing it completely. Several zombies were already squeezing through the gap, clawing their way inside. Tony, what do we do? 2 of the men looked at Tony, their faces pale with fear. Tony swung his fire axe, smashing the heads of a few zombies, his jaw clenched. We can't save him. Throw him out. We have to close the door. What? But the 2 men hesitated, shocked by the coldness of the order. They didn't want to abandon their friend. But in the face of life and death, they silently let go. Guys, please help me. The man on the ground cried out in despair, his body being dragged further outside by the zombies. But his survival instinct kicked in, and he clung to the edge of the shutter with all his strength, his fingernails digging into the metal. At that moment, a glint of ruthlessness flashed in Tony's eyes. He raised his fire axe high and, without hesitation, brought it down on the man's hands. Thwack! The axe severed his hands cleanly, blood spurting everywhere. The man let out a blood-curdling scream as his body was dragged outside, instantly swarmed by the zombies. With a final screech of metal, the shuttered door slammed shut. Not bad. Not bad at all, Ethan thought to himself as he watched from the window, slightly impressed. These guys had done pretty well. They'd only lost 2 people and still managed to break into a supermarket. Especially Tony. His final decision was swift and ruthless, with no hesitation. A smirk tugged at the corner of Ethan's mouth, a hint of amusement playing on his lips. But what a shame. The supermarket was already completely empty. In the supermarket, 3 men, covered in blood, leaned against the rolling shutter door, gasping for breath. Outside, the growls of zombies and the screeching sound of their nails scraping against the metal door continued relentlessly. Yet, despite the chaos, the men were excited. They had finally made it into the supermarket. We did it, one of them whispered, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Tony stood at the front, scanning the area, his mind filled with the desperate need for supplies. But after a few seconds, his expression darkened. Wait a minute, he muttered, his eyes suddenly sharp with suspicion. The shelves were completely empty. There was nothing. Where's all the stuff? He murmured, a hint of unease creeping into his voice. The other 2 froze as well, their excitement vanishing in an instant, replaced by confusion and disappointment. Could someone have beaten us here? One of them asked, puzzled. No way. Tony shook his head, his voice low and firm. Even if someone had been here, there's no way they could have cleaned the place out this thoroughly. Gripping the fire axe in his hand, Tony strode deeper into the supermarket, checking every corner. As they searched, Their initial excitement slowly gave way to frustration. The storage room was completely empty, not even a single hair left behind. "Damn it!" Derek roared, swinging his crowbar and smashing it into a nearby shelf, venting his anger. They had fought tooth and nail to get here, losing 2 teammates along the way, only to find nothing. "Calm down, Derek." Tony quickly stepped in, his voice carrying a warning. "You're just going to attract more zombies if you keep that up." Derek was breathing heavily, like an enraged bull, his eyes filled with frustration. "We're out of options, Tony," he growled through gritted teeth, his voice thick with despair. Tony didn't respond immediately. He frowned, lost in thought. After a moment, a glimmer of realization flashed in his eyes. "Not necessarily," he said slowly. "The fact that this place is so thoroughly cleaned out, it wasn't done by just any survivors. I'm guessing the owner of this supermarket was prepared." "You mean?" Derek and a younger guy holding a frying pan exchanged glances, starting to catch on. "Yeah," Tony nodded. "I've been to this supermarket before. The owner lives in the building across the street." A flicker of hope appeared in Derek's eyes. He tightened his grip on the crowbar, his voice resolute. "Then let's go find him." Tony nodded in agreement. "Exactly. If he's hoarding supplies, we'll take them." The guy with the frying pan hesitated for a moment, but seeing the determination in Tony and Derek's eyes, he clenched his jaw and nodded. All right. They had seen Tony and Derek in action on their journey here. They knew that with their strength, taking on a supermarket owner wouldn't be a problem. Or, if they were lucky, the owner might already be a zombie. In that case, all they'd have to do is take him out and claim the supplies. About 10 minutes later, the zombies gathered around the supermarket door began to disperse, wandering aimlessly. The rolling shutter door was quietly lifted just enough for the 3 men to slip out, moving with careful, silent precision. Covered in dirt and grime, their eyes alert, they quickly oriented themselves and made their way toward the building across the street. "Just as I thought," Ethan murmured to himself, standing by the window, a slight smirk playing on his lips. He had anticipated that they would make this move, and he had watched everything unfold. But for him, this was a perfect opportunity. It looked like the delivery had come straight to his door. With the building's power out, the elevator wasn't working, so the 3 men had no choice but to take the stairs. Climbing 42 floors drained their energy fast, especially since they encountered a few stray zombies in the stairwell. Though they were skilled fighters and easily dispatched the zombies, by the time they reached the top floor, they were drenched in sweat, gasping for air. "Huff! Huff! This should be it," Tony panted, turning to Derek. "Go knock on the door." Derek, already impatient, stepped forward and pounded on the door with all his strength. Bang, bang, bang. Bang, bang, bang. "Open up. Open the damn door." His roar echoed down the hallway. Inside, Ethan wasn't in any rush. He was calmly washing his hands, his movements slow and deliberate. After finishing, he picked up a towel, gently dried his hands, and then grabbed a pristine white napkin from the table, tucking it neatly into his collar. "It was time for dinner. I know you're in there. If you don't open up, we're breaking this door down." Tony shouted, raising his fire axe, his eyes cold and menacing. "You've got 3 seconds to decide. 3, 2, 1. The bloodstained axe was about to come crashing down. But just then there was a soft click. The door swung open. Bright light spilled out from inside, revealing a tall figure. The young man had pale skin, sharp features, and was strikingly handsome. He wore a spotless white shirt, not a speck of dirt on it, with a napkin tucked into his collar, looking impossibly clean. Tony and the others stared, dumbfounded. Since the apocalypse began, they hadn't seen anyone this clean. But what really unsettled them was the look in his eyes, cold, devoid of any emotion and humanity. "You're the supermarket owner, right?" Tony demanded. Ethan didn't respond. He stood there in silence. The other 2, growing anxious, chimed in. "Don't play dumb. We know you've got supplies. Hand them over, and we'll let you go." "Yeah, you got a napkin tucked in your collar. You were about to eat, weren't you? Say something, damn it." At that moment, Ethan slowly opened his mouth. "Gra gra." A low, raspy growl, like the sound of air bubbling through his throat, came out. The three men froze. They stood there, completely stunned. What the hell? A zombie? In their minds, zombies were always grotesque, terrifying, and filthy. But this guy, so clean, so composed, was actually a zombie? It was hard to believe. Well, if he's a zombie, that makes things easier. We'll just take him out. Tony gripped his fire axe tighter. In his experience, killing a zombie was way easier than dealing with a human. The other two nodded, ready to strike. But then, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Ethan's earlier growl had summoned his backup. Huh, more zombies. Tony tensed, but he wasn't too worried. After all, they fought their way here and had plenty of experience. Judging by the footsteps, there weren't many. The three of them were wrapped in layers of newspaper and duct tape, making them nearly impervious to small groups of zombies. They could handle this. Sure enough, three zombie figures appeared at the end of the hallway. But what they saw next made their blood run cold. Each of the zombies was holding something. Wait, is that? Tony and the others squinted, realizing something was very wrong. When they got a closer look, their faces went pale. Crossbows. Click. The three zombies raised their crossbows in unison, aiming directly at Tony and his crew. What the hell? Tony shouted in disbelief, completely stunned. He never could have imagined. Zombies using weapons. The three of them quickly realized these weren't ordinary zombies. They weren't rushing in to bite. They were acting like they'd been trained. Are you kidding me? Zombies with crossbows? Is there no justice left in this world? This scene completely shattered the trio's understanding of the situation. Big Tony, what do we do now? Derek's voice had a hint of panic. Just moments ago, he was full of swagger, but now he was at a loss. Tony furrowed his brow, a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. We fight. We gotta bet that their crossbows won't fire. Derek nodded, gritting his teeth. All right, let's do it. But Ethan had already given the order. Whoosh. The PhD zombie's crossbow bolt was deadly accurate, piercing straight through Derek's forehead. The force of the shot knocked him backward, slamming him to the ground. What the hell? Tony's eyes nearly popped out of his head. He had lost the bet. Whoosh, whoosh. Two more arrows sliced through the air. The athlete zombie's shots were just as merciless, one bolt going straight through another man's throat, killing him instantly. The WWE wrestler zombie, though all brawn and no brains, still managed to fire its crossbow with precision. The bolt buried itself deep into Tony's chest, puncturing his lung. Ah! Tony let out a scream of agony, collapsing to the ground from the searing pain. He tried to get back up, but the WWE wrestler zombie let out a low growl and rushed forward, pinning him down. It didn't bite him, though. These zombies were like a pack of wolves. Without the command of their king, they wouldn't feed recklessly. Tony gritted his teeth, slowly coming to a realization. These zombies weren't just mindless monsters. They were organized, disciplined. And their king was none other than the supermarket owner, Ethan. Could it be they have some level of intelligence? Can they understand me? Tony's mind raced as he fought through the pain in his chest. Desperately, he pleaded, "Please, spare me. I didn't have a choice. If you let me live, I'll do anything for you." Ethan walked closer, step by step, until he stood right in front of Tony. He looked down at him, his eyes cold and devoid of any pity. Then he reached out and grabbed the crossbow bolt lodged in Tony's chest, yanking it out with a sharp pull. Squelch! Blood gushed from the wound like a fountain. Tony let out another gut-wrenching scream, his heart filling with terror. He had no idea what this monster was going to do next. Ethan stared at him coldly, then casually pulled a straw out of his storage ring. What the? Tony's mind went blank. He could hardly believe what he was seeing, but he had a sickening feeling he knew what Ethan was about to do. How much energy is really in human blood? Ethan wondered to himself. After all, he had never tried it before. He inserted the straw into Tony's wound, preparing to drink his blood. But after a few moments, Ethan's face twisted in disgust. He spat the blood out, turning his head away with a look of revulsion. This guy's too fat. His blood's full of fat. Tony was stunned, unable to process what had just happened. Even zombies didn't want his blood? Did that mean he still had a chance to survive? But Tony's fleeting hope was quickly crushed. Ethan had already given the command, and the three zombies, starving and eager, pounced on him without hesitation. Tony's screams were abruptly cut off, blood splattering everywhere. The scene was brutal and gory. Not long after, the three zombies stood with blood dripping from their mouths, licking the remnants with satisfaction. Their loyalty to Ethan seemed to grow even stronger, with a hint of admiration. After all, following Ethan meant there was always meat to eat. Ring-a-ling-ling, ring-a-ling-ling. Suddenly, the shrill sound of a phone ringing pierced the silence. Who still uses such an old-school ringtone? Ethan frowned, looking around for the source of the sound. It was coming from Tony's pocket. He bent down, picked up the phone, and casually answered it. A man's voice came through the phone, laced with a threatening tone. "Tony, don't try anything funny. Bring the supplies back now. Your wife's with me, and if you come back empty-handed..." Ha ha ha. Hearing this, Ethan immediately understood Tony's situation. So, he was being forced to scavenge for supplies. No wonder he'd mentioned having no choice earlier. "Hey, Tony, you mute or something? Don't play dead on me. Here, listen to your wife." The voice on the other end grew more impatient, followed by the sound of a woman sobbing. "Honey, help me. They're monsters. Please, save me. Wawa." Ethan listened coldly, then hung up without hesitation. Funny thing was, compared to those monsters, he was a zombie. Still, the call had given him a lead. Ethan decided to track down where these people were hiding. After all, living humans were a resource too. And these people, well, he could treat them like an all-you-can-eat buffet. He fiddled with the phone, scrolling through Tony's texts and Facebook messages. It didn't take long to find some clues. The buffet was located at a construction site. Tony had once been a foreman there, known for exploiting workers with ruthless tactics. After reading through the messages, Ethan casually tossed the phone off the building, mentally noting the location. But he wasn't in any rush to enjoy this buffet. For now, he didn't feel like leaving his cozy little hideout. Even though Ethan was already powerful and had 3 loyal underlings, he decided to lay low for a few more days. Who knew what other dangers were lurking out there? Back at home, Ethan slipped on his slippers, washed his hands, and sat down at the dining table to continue absorbing energy. He turned on the TV, eating while watching, savoring the moment of peace. 5 hours later, he was finally full. As his body continued to strengthen, his appetite had grown as well. Where he once needed to eat just 1 cow a day, now he needed 3 to satisfy his body's demands. After finishing his meal, Ethan took a hot bath and changed into a clean set of white pajamas. Then he washed his dirty clothes, tidied everything up, and sat contentedly on the couch, ready to watch some more TV. Outside, night had fallen. The streets were still a mess, the air thick with the stench of rotting blood. Countless zombies roamed the streets, hunting for the last remaining survivors. But the chaos of the apocalypse seemed to have nothing to do with Ethan. He was comfortably holed up in his little sanctuary, enjoying a rare moment of tranquility. Whoa, 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 whoa. Suddenly, a low, mournful cry echoed from somewhere in the building. The sound was eerie and sorrowful, reverberating through the night, making it all the more unsettling. If a normal person had heard it, they'd probably be scared out of their mind. But Ethan just rolled his eyes, completely unafraid and even a little annoyed. The sound was coming from one of his underlings, the female athlete zombie. She's crying? Could she have developed emotions? Ethan wondered to himself. He speculated that the female zombie, having eaten enough flesh and blood today, might have undergone some kind of evolution, leading to basic emotional responses. It wasn't that surprising. After all, zombies that evolved to a certain level could indeed develop emotions and intelligence similar to humans. In fact, if a zombie evolved to an S rank, its intelligence might be indistinguishable from that of a human. Of course, the speed of a zombie's evolution also depended on its potential. Take the PhD zombie, for example. Ethan figured it wouldn't be long before it gained a high level of intelligence. And this female zombie, It seemed she wasn't lacking in potential either, already showing signs of emotional development. Guess I'll go see why she's crying. Ethan was a bit curious. After all, he had nothing better to do. So he got up and headed downstairs. The eerie sound of sobbing echoed through the empty hallway, as if it were coming from all directions, sending a chill down Ethan's spine. He knew exactly where the sound was coming from, right below his room. That's where the female zombie lived. She had lived there even before she turned. The door was slightly ajar, with a faint light seeping through the crack. The sobbing was coming from inside. Ethan gently pushed the door open, and the sight before him made him frown slightly. The female zombie was kneeling in the middle of the living room, her back to him, her shoulders shaking as if she were caught in some deep sorrow. Ugh, ugh, ugh. Her sobs were broken and filled with a kind of indescribable sadness. Even though Ethan had moved quietly, the female zombie's hearing was incredibly sharp. The moment the door creaked, she whipped her head around, her neck twisting at an unnatural 180-degree angle. Her eyes were blazing with fury, and she let out a low growl, as if she was ready to pounce on him at any second. But when she realized it was Ethan standing in the doorway, the growl stopped abruptly. Her once ferocious face softened into something almost pitiful, even a little fawning. Ugh, ugh. She continued to sob softly, as if trying to communicate something to Ethan. Standing at the door, Ethan watched her coldly. He already knew what she was trying to say. She was saying, "I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry." What a glutton! Ethan muttered to himself. She's already eaten plenty today. The other two haven't made a peep, but here she is, crying her eyes out. The female zombie seemed to sense Ethan's thoughts. She lowered her head and let out a few whimpering sounds, as if ashamed of her own greed. Ethan couldn't be bothered to argue. He casually pulled a corpse out of his storage ring and tossed it in front of her. It was a thug he had killed earlier. The body was still relatively fresh. The moment she saw the flesh, the female zombie's eyes lit up, and a twisted smile crept across her face. She let out a chilling laugh. He. Then, in a flash, she lunged at the corpse, moving so fast it was hard to follow. Her powerful legs left a blur as they scraped across the floor. Ethan stood off to the side, watching her tear into the body with cold detachment. Her laughter was even more unsettling than her sobbing, like something straight out of a nightmare. Her muscular body, especially those strong legs, was clearly a remnant of her athletic past. As she devoured the corpse, the room filled with the thick stench of blood. The sounds of chewing and ripping flesh echoed through the space, creating a scene so grotesque that any normal person would have been scared out of their mind. "Take your time. It reeks in here," Ethan muttered, wrinkling his nose as he turned to leave. He had just taken a shower and didn't want the stench clinging to him, like how people smell after eating at a hot pot restaurant. As he walked back to his room, he glanced at the doors of the other two zombies, the PhD zombie and the WWE wrestler zombie. They were quiet, clearly not in need of any extra feeding. It seemed the saying was true: the squeaky will get the grease. Back in his room, Ethan sat on the couch, thinking about his next move. Sure, he still had plenty of flesh stored in his ring, but he knew that wouldn't last forever. In the early days of the apocalypse, supplies were still relatively easy to come by, but as time went on, resources would become scarcer and scarcer. It's time to go out and restock, he decided silently. He picked up his phone and opened Messenger, scrolling to his chat with Lola. She had sent him a ton of messages, along with several missed calls. "Honey, are you okay? Why aren't you answering me? Ethan, I'm really worried about you. Please, just reply. Are you all right? I'm so scared. Please come find me and bring some supplies." There were many more messages like that. It was clear Lola was on the verge of a breakdown. Ethan finally sent a short reply. "I'm still here." Almost immediately, Lola's response popped up. "You're alive. Thank God. Why didn't you answer my calls? I've been so worried." Ethan replied calmly, "I'm surrounded by zombies. Didn't want to risk making noise, so I've had my phone on silent." He wasn't lying. After all, he really was surrounded by zombies. Lola's voice came through the phone, trembling slightly. Ethan, I miss you so much. Whether you're dead or alive, I just want to see you. Can you come find me? Ethan's reply was short and cold. Sure, I'll come tomorrow. Okay. Lola's voice was filled with barely contained excitement. I'll be waiting for you at the dorms. Please, bring as much food as you can. We need to survive. Got it. A faint, cruel smile tugged at Ethan's lips, a glint of malice flashing in his eyes. It was time to collect. The next morning, Ethan dressed in a clean tracksuit and stood in front of the mirror, examining himself. His reflection was still handsome, but his face showed no trace of emotion. Ever since he had turned into a zombie, he retained his human intelligence, but his emotions had dulled, becoming cold and numb. This change made him seem more composed, as if nothing in the world could affect him. He headed downstairs and walked to the street, where a medium-sized box truck was parked. It was the same one he had used to haul supplies from the supermarket earlier. Climbing into the driver's seat, he started the engine. With a low growl, he signaled his 3 zombie subordinates that it was time to go hunting. A chorus of low growls echoed from the building. The female zombie was the first to appear, moving with incredible speed. She shot down the stairs like a gust of wind, her mouth letting out that eerie he laugh, her face full of excitement. Halfway down, she seemed to decide the stairs were too slow and leaped out of a window, landing gracefully on the ground without a scratch. She quickly scrambled into the back of the truck. Next came the WWE wrestler zombie. He was even bigger than before, his muscles bulging so much they looked like they might tear through his skin. His grayish-white flesh was veined with thick, pulsing lines, and he stood nearly 6 feet 6 inches. Every step he took seemed to make the ground tremble slightly. The apartment door was too narrow for his massive frame, so he simply smashed through it, charging out like a runaway bull. Watching him, Ethan silently gave him a nickname, Bulldozer. After Bulldozer climbed into the truck, the PhD zombie appeared last. He moved calmly, with a deliberate slowness that set him apart from the others. Once inside the truck, he even took the time to close the door behind him, a stark contrast to the chaotic behavior of the others. Ethan slammed his foot on the gas, and the truck's engine roared as it shot down the street. Zombies and abandoned cars alike were ruthlessly mowed down or crushed under the truck's wheels. The zombies on the street howled in response, but since Ethan and his crew were also zombies, they didn't attack. Ethan sped down the road, heading straight for the University of Southern California. In the back of the truck, the female zombie was unusually excited, letting out her creepy laugh every now and then, clearly eager to start hunting. Bulldozer, on the other hand, seemed confused. His intelligence wasn't high, and he couldn't quite grasp why they were sitting in this black box instead of going out to hunt. Ethan's driving was aggressive, constantly smashing through obstacles, causing the truck to jolt violently. Bulldozer's massive size made him a victim of inertia, and he was tossed around the back of the truck, looking a bit ridiculous. But it wasn't long before Ethan arrived at USC. A group of zombies was wandering near the entrance, but Ethan plowed through them without hesitation, driving straight to the dorms. Once the truck came to a stop, the 3 zombie subordinates quickly jumped out of the back. Bulldozer, finally free from the cramped truck, stood still for a moment, taking in his surroundings. The scene around him was completely different from when he had gotten into the truck. With his limited intelligence, he clearly couldn't understand what had happened. Wait, does getting in the black box make you go somewhere else? Bulldozer seemed to have figured something out and let out a deafening roar toward the sky. Roar! His roar was so loud that the nearby windows shattered, and the lower-level zombies in the area scattered in fear, as if terrified of this hulking beast. Even Ethan was startled by the sudden roar. He turned to Bulldozer, frowning. "What are you yelling for?" Bulldozer growled back, his voice deep and wild. "Roar, roar, roar. I don't even know why I'm yelling." Ethan shook his head in exasperation, muttering to himself, "What an idiot." The roar of the zombies echoed through the air like thunder, startling a flock of birds nearby. They flapped their wings frantically, flying off into the distance. Inside the girls' dorm, the survivors heard the terrifying sound too, and panic quickly set in. Lola was curled up in the corner, her body trembling slightly, her face pale. "Ethan, do you think he's already been eaten by the zombies?" Her voice quivered, and her eyes were filled with unease. "Probably," a muscular guy responded coldly. "I heard a car outside earlier. It had to be him, but he must have attracted those monsters." Another tall, well-built guy nodded, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Looks like your boyfriend's really head over heels for you. Knowing how dangerous it is, he still came looking for you." The 5 people with Lola were all members of the school's basketball team, and she was a cheerleader. That's how they ended up together. Head over heels? A third guy scoffed, a hint of disdain flashing in his eyes. "Nah, he's just a simp. And in the end, he's going to get nothing for it." As he finished speaking, he casually slapped Lola on the butt, his eyes gleaming with a twisted sense of satisfaction. He enjoyed this feeling, making someone who was seen as a goddess by others submit to him. Lola didn't seem to care about his actions. Instead, she complained, "So what now? Ethan's useless. He couldn't even bring us any food." "Shh, quiet." The fourth guy suddenly perked up, his face changing as he quickly grabbed a steel pipe nearby. "I think I hear something outside. Someone's coming up." Everyone immediately fell silent, holding their breath as they listened closely to the sounds outside. Sure enough, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, accompanied by the low growls of zombies, getting closer and closer. "Hey, looks like your simp boyfriend really made it in," the fifth guy said with an excited grin, licking his cracked lips. They had run out of food days ago, and the hunger had worn down their patience. Even Lola, as attractive as she was, no longer stirred any interest in them. "Stick to the plan," one of the guys whispered. The 5 of them, armed with steel pipes, quietly positioned themselves on either side of the door, ready to ambush Ethan the moment he walked in. Their plan was simple: take whatever supplies he brought, and then kill him. After all, in this apocalypse, one more person meant less food to go around, and they had already decided that Ethan's life wasn't worth much. Thud, thud, thud. A rhythmic knock came from the door, slow and deliberate, with an eerie calmness. Lola peeked through the peephole and saw a familiar face, pale but handsome. It was Ethan. "Hurry, come in." She quickly unlocked the door, as if afraid he might leave if she didn't act fast. Ethan stepped into the room, and Lola immediately locked the door behind him. At that moment, the 5 guys emerged from the shadows, surrounding Ethan with their steel pipes in hand. "Where's the food? Where do you stash it?" one of the guys asked coldly, his eyes gleaming with greed. Their original plan had been to attack as soon as Ethan walked in, but seeing him empty-handed, they decided to get some answers first. Ethan's face remained expressionless as his gaze swept across the room, finally landing on Lola. Lola met his eyes without a hint of guilt. Instead, she smirked. "Yeah, I lied to you. But in times like these, there's no point explaining. It's every man for himself." Ethan stayed silent, his eyes cold. The 5 guys were clearly running out of patience. "Say something, damn it. Where's the food?" one of them shouted, gripping his steel pipe tightly, his patience wearing thin. "Hurry up and hand it over, or we'll beat you to death," another guy threatened, his eyes wild with desperation. "Yeah, it's the end of the world. No one's going to care if we kill you," a third guy added with a sneer. Hunger had twisted their faces, their eyes filled with a savage, animalistic rage. In that moment, Ethan realized that starving humans weren't much different from zombies. They'd lost their minds, and maybe they were even more dangerous. "If you don't talk, I'll kill you right now." One of the guys finally snapped, swinging his steel pipe straight at Ethan's head. This guy was one of the basketball team's star players, tall, strong, and powerful. The pipe cut through the air with a sharp whoosh. No ordinary person could block an attack like that. But Ethan simply raised his hand and caught the pipe effortlessly. With a dull thud, the pipe stopped mid-swing, unable to move an inch further. "What the hell?" The guy's face twisted in shock. He tried to yank the steel pipe back, but Ethan's grip was like a vice, completely immovable. Seeing this, 2 other guys rushed forward to help. And that's when Ethan finally spoke. After days of mutation, his ability to speak had slowly returned. Though his voice was still raspy and stiff, he managed to utter a few chilling words. "You are the food." The air in the room froze. Everyone stood still, paralyzed. A cold shiver ran down their spines, their hearts pounding as an invisible wave of terror gripped them. They finally realized the horrifying truth. Ethan was no longer human. "Holy shit, he's a zombie," one of the guys stammered, his legs turning to jelly. The steel pipe in his hand clattered to the floor as he instinctively backed away. But Ethan merely flicked his wrist, and the pipe, as if controlled by some unseen force, shot through the air, impaling the guy straight through the mouth. The force was so great that the pipe burst out the back of his skull. Thwack! Blood sprayed everywhere. Lola and the remaining guys went pale, their fear reaching a fever pitch. Whatever shred of sanity they had left shattered in that moment. "Run!" someone screamed, and they all bolted for the door, desperate to escape this nightmare. But as soon as they turned, they slammed into something solid. The impact knocked them to the ground. Looking up, they realized they had run straight into a wall of muscle, a zombie standing nearly 6 feet 6 inches, its body rippling with grotesque strength. Rare! The creature, known as Bulldozer, let out a deafening roar and swung its massive arm down. Two of the guys' heads were crushed instantly, their skulls exploding in a spray of blood and brain matter. Lola was splattered with blood, frozen in place, her legs too weak to move. Then she heard it, a strange, eerie laugh, like a whisper from the depths of hell. She turned instinctively and saw a female zombie, her long tongue flicking out as she licked her nails, a twisted smile on her face. The stench of decay was so close, Lola could almost taste it. "Ah!" Lola screamed, completely losing control. Warmth spread through her pants as she trembled uncontrollably, her body betraying her in sheer terror. At that moment, Ethan stepped out from the shadows. Bulldozer and the female zombie immediately stopped what they were doing, standing at attention on either side of Ethan, as if awaiting his command. Their expressions were almost proud, like hunting dogs showing off their kills to their master. Meanwhile, another zombie, a PhD in a tattered lab coat, had already pinned one of the guys to the ground. With surgical precision, it drove its sharp nails into his throat, forehead, and chest, as if conducting some grotesque experiment. The scene was far more horrifying than even Bulldozer's brutal head crushing. Lola and the last surviving guy were trembling uncontrollably, their faces drained of all color. They finally understood. Ethan wasn't just a zombie. He was their leader. "Please, don't kill me. I'm sorry. I swear I'm sorry." The guy collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face. All his previous bravado was gone, replaced by the pitiful whimpering of a terrified animal. Lola finally realized what was happening and quickly started pleading, "Ethan, don't you love me? Please don't kill me. I'll do anything, really, anything. You can have me whenever you want. I'll be yours and yours alone from now on. We can start right now. I'm willing to do anything, please." As she spoke, Lola let her straps slide down, revealing her round, pale breasts and pink nipples. Ethan's gaze swept over her coldly, his face showing no hint of emotion. Seeing this, Lola unzipped Ethan's pants and took out his 9-inch member, beginning to suck on it. Ethan slowly looked down at her, his index finger lifting Lola's chin. At this moment, Lola's face was flushed, and she stood up, looking eagerly at Ethan. Suddenly, a dagger appeared in Ethan's hand. In a chilling voice, he said, "What I want is your heart." Before she could react, the knife plunged into her chest without hesitation. "Ah!" A blood-curdling scream echoed through the hallway, lingering in the air long after it was first heard. Ethan flicked his wrist, and the sharp blade of his knife slid out of Lola's chest, pulling with it a still-beating heart. Blood dripped from his fingers, staining the floor beneath him. Bulldozer stood nearby, his eyes locked on the heart, drool dripping uncontrollably from the corner of his mouth. Lola's body collapsed to the ground, her eyes wide open, frozen in terror. The fear and despair she felt in her final moments were still etched on her face. Her life was gone, and all the pleading and seduction she had tried earlier now seemed utterly ridiculous. Ethan glanced at the heart in his hand, his brow furrowing slightly. He clearly had no interest in this trophy. With a cold tone, he muttered, "Too messy." Without a second thought, he tossed the heart to Bulldozer. Bulldozer caught it eagerly, like he'd just been handed the most precious meal. He opened his mouth wide and swallowed the heart in one bite, chewing with satisfaction. Ugh, ugh. The only surviving guy sat slumped on the floor, trembling uncontrollably. Tears and snot covered his face as he stared blankly ahead, completely broken by the carnage he had just witnessed. His mind was on the verge of collapse. A female zombie standing nearby noticed his sobbing and curled her lips into a twisted smile, letting out a low, eerie chuckle. Ha ha ha. She seemed to find the scene amusing, or maybe, in her own warped way, she was trying to comfort him, as if to say, "Don't cry, today's a good day." But her comfort was anything but gentle. With a slight movement of her hand, her sharp nails pierced the guy's neck, slicing through his artery with precision. His sobbing stopped instantly as blood gushed out, splattering the floor. The hallway fell into a deathly silence. That silence didn't last long, though. Soon, the sound of chewing and gnawing filled the empty corridor as several zombies gathered around, feasting on the fresh kill. Ethan stood off to the side, watching it all unfold with cold indifference. The thrill of the kill gave him a brief sense of satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Suddenly, he remembered something: the school cafeteria. There might still be supplies there, especially in the freezer, where they stored a lot of fresh meat. Since he was already here, he figured he might as well raid the place. He waved his hand, signaling for Bulldozer and the other zombies to follow him. Leading the group, he walked out of the dorm building, across the abandoned schoolyard, and toward the cafeteria. As they approached, Ethan noticed that the number of zombies around the cafeteria had increased. Several of them were frantically pounding on the glass doors, as if something inside was drawing them in, making them desperate to get through. The glass was smeared with bloody handprints, creating a blurry, crimson mess. There might be survivors inside, Ethan thought to himself. But these zombies weren't exactly the brightest. The glass doors opened outward, but they were all pushing inward, completely clueless about how to get in. Ethan found them annoying and gave Bulldozer a simple order: clear them out. With a low growl, Bulldozer charged forward like a beast. He grabbed one of the zombies and swung it hard against the wall. Smack! The zombie's body hit the wall with a sickening thud, practically turning into a pile of mush as it slid down, leaving a long streak of blood behind. The other zombies growled in response, but they were clearly afraid of Bulldozer. They backed off, not daring to get any closer. Bulldozer, despite his brute strength, wasn't much smarter than the average zombie. He also tried pushing the glass door, but he used too much force. With a loud crack, the entire door, frame and all, shattered into pieces. Ethan stepped into the cafeteria, the air thick with the stench of decay, making it almost unbearable to breathe. The hall was eerily quiet. A few zombie corpses lay scattered on the floor, their heads blown open. The blood had long since dried, leaving dark, crusty stains. It was clear that these zombies had been taken out by human survivors. Since the apocalypse had hit early in the morning, there hadn't been many people in the cafeteria, so it hadn't become a major gathering spot for the undead. But Ethan knew that if there were any survivors, they were probably hiding in the storage rooms. There was plenty of food in there, enough to keep them alive for a while. Ethan didn't hesitate. He headed straight for the storage room. Soon, he found himself in front of a heavy iron door. It was tightly shut. He gave it a push, but it didn't budge. It was locked up tight. Just then, he caught the faint sound of voices coming from behind the door. The conversation was hushed and frantic, clearly from people inside. Though the voices were quiet, Ethan's sharp hearing picked up every word. "Crap, I think there's a zombie outside. What do we do?" A woman's voice, trembling with fear. "Don't worry, I'll protect you," a man whispered, holding her close. Despite his reassurance, the woman's voice still shook. "Shouldn't we try to run?" "If you want to leave, go ahead. Staying here just wastes food." A middle-aged man in a chef's uniform snapped from across the room, his tone dripping with disdain. The man who had been comforting the woman frowned, clearly wanting to argue, but when he saw the sharp, boning knife in the chef's hand, he thought better of it and stayed silent. There were 5 people hiding in the storage room. Besides the couple and the chef, there were 2 other young women. Fear was written all over their faces, especially after hearing the noises outside. One of the girls, strikingly beautiful, had her lips pressed tightly together. She was Nina, the warehouse manager who had worked with Ethan at the supermarket before. Nina came from a poor family and had been working part-time jobs to support her studies. After Ethan had fired her, she found work at the school cafeteria as a stockroom clerk. Despite her looks attracting plenty of admirers, Nina had always prided herself on being independent, never relying on anyone. "The zombies, they can't get in, right?" Nina asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yeah," the chef nodded, sounding confident. "Those zombies are dumb as rocks. They couldn't even figure out how to open the glass doors outside, let alone this locked iron door." Hearing this, the others seemed to relax a little, thinking he had a point. But their brief moment of relief was shattered by a sudden, deafening crash. A massive dent appeared in the iron door, the outline of 5 fingers clearly visible, as if some enormous force was trying to tear it open. It was obviously Bulldozer's handiwork. He swung his huge fist again, slamming it into the door. Bang! The door shook violently, dust falling from the ceiling as another deep handprint appeared on the metal. The 5 people inside were frozen in shock. What the hell is that?" someone asked, their voice filled with terror. "I don't know. Maybe a mutated zombie," another person stammered. Run. We have to get out of here," someone screamed. Realizing the iron door wouldn't hold much longer, the group panicked and bolted toward the back of the storage room, where a narrow hallway led to a small freezer. It might be their last chance to hide, but they hadn't made it far when Bulldozer's fist slammed into the door again. This time, with a screech of tearing metal, half the door was ripped apart. Bulldozer's massive frame squeezed through the opening, standing in the doorway like a beast ready to pounce. "Oh my God!" The group glanced back, and the sight of the hulking zombie sent them into a frenzy of fear. They had never seen a zombie this powerful, and terror spread through them like wildfire. The chef, still clutching his boning knife, was the first to make a run for it. He sprinted toward the freezer door, faster than anyone else. "Hurry! Get inside! The zombie's coming," he shouted. But just then, a chilling laugh echoed down the dim hallway, like something straight out of a nightmare. The chef squinted and saw a thin figure darting toward them at an alarming speed. It was a female zombie, moving with the agility of a predator. At the same time, the guy from the couple had also reached the freezer door, but his girlfriend and Nina were lagging behind. "Wait for me, babe," the girl cried out, panic in her voice. The guy turned to look and saw the terrifying female zombie closing in on his girlfriend. His face went pale, torn between fear and indecision. But in the end, he made his choice. "Shut the door," he yelled, gritting his teeth. As the third girl made it into the freezer, the 3 of them slammed the door shut with all their strength. With a loud, dull thud, the cold storage door slammed shut behind the girl, locking her out without mercy. She threw herself at the door, pounding on the cold metal with her fists in a frenzy. "Open the door. Please, open the door." Her voice was filled with desperation, her cries raw and heart-wrenching. But inside, there was only silence. No response. Her fists were already going numb, the pain spreading up her arms, but it seemed like the people behind the door had completely abandoned her. A wave of indescribable pain and anger surged through her. Just minutes ago, the man who had sworn to protect her had shut the door without hesitation, as if her life meant nothing to him. "Bastard," she spat through gritted teeth, her eyes burning with hatred. At that moment, a cold gust of wind hit her from behind. She whipped around, her pupils contracting in terror as fear gripped her heart. The female zombie was only about 20 feet away, its empty, crazed eyes locked on her. A twisted smile played on its lips, as if it was savoring the hunt that was about to unfold. Her heart pounded wildly, threatening to burst out of her chest. In that split second, a thought flashed through her mind. She had to survive, no matter the cost. Her eyes darted around, and then landed on Nina, who was standing nearby. Almost instinctively, she reached out and shoved Nina with all her strength, pushing her toward the zombie. Ah! Nina screamed as she lost her balance and fell hard to the ground. The zombie, like a predator pouncing on its prey, lunged at Nina in an instant. It straddled her, its hands clamping down on her wrists like iron, pinning her to the floor. Nina struggled desperately, trying to break free from the deadly grip, but her strength was nothing compared to the zombie's. Ha ha ha! The zombie let out a chilling laugh, as if it was relishing the thrill of the hunt. Its eyes gleamed with a manic excitement, as though the fresh meat it had just caught had put it in a particularly good mood. Nina was consumed by fear. She had never been this close to death. That twisted face was inches from hers, grinning madly, as if it was about to tear her apart at any moment. She squeezed her eyes shut, her mind filled with a single thought: just make it quick. She had given up fighting, resigned to the inevitable. But the pain she expected never came. Instead, the zombie suddenly released her wrists, leaping off her and lunging toward the other girl. Ah! The girl let out a blood-curdling scream as a sharp pain shot through her neck. The zombie's teeth sank deep into her skin, and blood gushed out in a torrent. Her body convulsed violently, the agony so intense that she nearly blacked out. Her eyes were wide open, filled with despair and confusion. She couldn't understand why the zombie had spared Nina and chosen her instead. But there was no time to think. Her screams quickly faded, and her body went limp, drained of all life. Meanwhile, Nina still lay on the ground, her eyes tightly shut, her mind racing with questions. Why didn't she feel any pain? Was she already dead? Hesitantly, she opened her eyes. Her vision slowly cleared, and she saw a tall figure standing over her. It was a man, pale-skinned and strikingly handsome, looking down at her. "Be boss." Nina's eyes widened in shock. She recognized him. It was Ethan, her old boss from the supermarket where she used to work. She never imagined she'd see him again, especially not like this. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his gaze calm as he studied her. The reason he hadn't killed Nina wasn't because of any lingering affection from their past. It was simply because he found her quick and efficient. And right now, he needed someone to clean, do laundry, and wash dishes. Killing her for food would have been a waste. Besides, he wasn't short on food at the moment. Keeping her around for now wouldn't hurt. "Get up." Ethan's voice was cold and commanding. It was only then that Nina realized Ethan had become a zombie too. And standing obediently by his side was the massive bulldozer, waiting for his orders like a well-trained dog. Nina's legs felt like jelly. She could barely stand. Leaning against the wall for support, she shakily got to her feet, her heart pounding with fear and confusion. "Boss, are you okay?" she asked cautiously, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, seemingly in a good mood, probably because he had just killed Lola. He glanced at Nina and suddenly asked, "Do you want to come back to work?" Nina froze for a moment, then quickly realized what he meant. This was her chance to survive. She couldn't let it slip away. I do. Of course I do." She nodded frantically, like a woodpecker. Her heart was racing, thudding so hard it felt like it might burst out of her chest. Ethan's question left her mind blank, but she knew she had no choice. Saying no meant death, and she wasn't ready to die. "I'll do it," she blurted out, her voice shaky but resolute. Her eyes were filled with fear, but even more so with the will to live. Ethan gave a slight nod, unsurprised by her answer. Without another glance at her, he walked toward the cold storage door, with Bulldozer following closely behind, like a loyal hunting dog. Inside the cold storage, 3 people were pressed against the door, holding their breath, as if that could somehow keep the threat outside at bay. Thud, thud, thud. The pounding on the door was deafening, each hit like a hammer striking their hearts. How is this zombie so strong? The boy's voice was filled with fear and unease. The chef gritted his teeth, trying to stay calm. "Don't worry. This door is made of 2-inch thick stainless steel. Not even a truck could break through it, let alone a zombie." The boy nodded, looking slightly reassured, though his palms were still slick with cold sweat. Outside, Bulldozer continued to slam against the door with relentless force. The ground trembled slightly, and bits of ice fell from the walls. But the door didn't budge, and instead, Bulldozer's arms began to go numb from the effort. Raph! Bulldozer let out a furious roar, his eyes wild with rage. No matter how powerful his fists were, he couldn't break through the solid door. Ethan stood by, watching coldly. He knew that while Bulldozer was strong, brute force alone wouldn't open this door. Just as he was about to step in, Nina suddenly moved forward, a determined look flashing in her eyes. "Boss, I have the key to the cold storage." Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable resolve behind it. Ethan raised an eyebrow, a hint of a satisfied smile appearing on his face. "Good," he said, his tone carrying a trace of approval. Nina quickly went to the adjacent room, grabbed the key hanging on the wall, and handed it to Ethan with both hands. She knew this might be her only chance, the only way to prove her worth. Ethan took the key and motioned for Bulldozer to step back. Though confused, Bulldozer obeyed, standing aside with a flicker of frustrated anger in his eyes. Inside the cold storage, the three people heard the pounding on the door suddenly stop, and they breathed a collective sigh of relief. "I told you, there's no way that zombie could get in," the chef said smugly, as if the fear from moments ago had never existed. The boy nodded, his tension easing slightly. "Just wait a little longer. The zombie should leave soon." But just as they thought the danger had passed, a faint click came from the door's lock. What's happening? The chef's face turned pale, his eyes wide with disbelief and terror. The boy's face drained of color as well, his voice trembling. "No way. How could a zombie pick a lock?" The girl had already started crying, her body shaking uncontrollably as tears blurred her vision. "We're done for. We're done for." As the lock turned, the sounds outside became clearer. Their hearts seemed to stop. They knew the door was about to open. "Quick! Block the door with something," the chef shouted, his voice filled with desperation. They scrambled to pile whatever they could find in front of the door, trying to hold off the inevitable. But deep down, they knew it was a futile effort. Just as the lock clicked open, Bulldozer slammed into the door with all his might. With a thunderous crash, the cold storage door was flung open. Everything they had stacked in front of the door was sent flying, scattering across the floor. The cold air from the storage rushed out, and a massive figure loomed in the doorway. It carried the unmistakable stench of death. The massive figure of Bulldozer flashed by, and a young man stood at the entrance. He was dressed in a clean white shirt. Looking so neat, it was as if he had just walked out of a formal event. His face carried a hint of cold indifference. The three people inside stared at him, frozen in terror, unable to speak. Is he even human? Or a ghost? Behind him stood Bulldozer and the female zombie, their menacing presence so intense it felt like the air around them had thickened, suffocating the three trapped inside the cold storage. As their eyes swept over these terrifying figures, they suddenly recognized a familiar face, Nina. You're still alive?" the chef asked in disbelief. Nina looked at them coldly, her face showing a trace of anger. "Yes, surprised?" Her voice was filled with resentment. These three had locked her outside, leaving her to almost die. If Ethan hadn't shown up in time, she would have been zombie food by now. At that moment, the three zombies began to slowly close in. Bulldozer was still restless, growling lowly. He held Ethan in awe. His boss had opened the door with just a small stick, effortlessly. Meanwhile, Bulldozer himself was itching to show off his strength. The female zombie had a twisted smile on her face, her pale complexion making her look even more terrifying. "Please, Nina, save me. I don't want to die. I don't want to be eaten by zombies." The girl had already collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Her voice was filled with despair, a far cry from the cold, decisive tone she had used when she shut the door earlier. Nina looked at her and shook her head. "It's not up to me whether you live or die. That's for my boss to decide." All three of them turned their gaze to Ethan. This clean-cut young man was actually the leader of these zombies. "Please don't kill me. I'll do anything if you let me live." The girl cried, trembling as she began to unbutton her clothes, desperately trying to use her body to bargain for her life. The chef quickly chimed in. "Boss, I can cook. I can make you amazing food. I even won a city cooking competition once." They all knew that relying on Ethan's mercy was a long shot. Their only hope was to prove they were still useful. Ethan glanced at the chef and said calmly, "No need for all that trouble. Let's just start the meal." "What?" The chef's eyes widened, finally understanding what Ethan meant. "Roar!" The three zombies let out a vicious growl and lunged at them. Screams filled the air, but only for a few seconds. After that, the cold storage was filled with nothing but the sound of flesh being torn apart. Amidst the blood-soaked scene, Ethan remained spotless, casually strolling around the cold storage, inspecting the supplies. The place was well-stocked, with everything from Angus beef, New Zealand lamb, and French breast chicken to bluefin tuna, an impressive variety, and in large quantities. With a wave of his hand, all the ingredients vanished, stored away in his spatial ring. He had nearly replenished all the supplies he had used up earlier. Ethan was quite pleased with the haul. Meanwhile, the three zombies were feasting. Bulldozer and the female zombie devoured the bodies like ravenous beasts, tearing into the flesh in a grotesque display that would make anyone sick. The PhD zombie, however, was different. He first opened up the bodies, carefully removing the organs one by one, as if conducting a dissection. Only then did he slowly consume the organs. Though the PhD zombie's actions seemed more refined compared to Bulldozer and the female zombie, they were far more unsettling. A zombie performing an autopsy, it was a chilling sight. And at that moment, the only one still alive, Nina, was doing her best to suppress the nausea rising in her throat. She was the only normal human left here, and the sight of the zombies feasting made her feel like she was about to throw up. But she quickly covered her mouth, forcing the nausea back down. She knew that Ethan had become very particular about cleanliness lately. If she threw up here and annoyed him, she might not live to see another day. Ethan swiftly stored all the supplies from the cold storage into his spatial ring. Not just the fresh meat, but also the rice, flour, oil, and other essentials from a storeroom. In addition, there was a small convenience store next to the cafeteria. The beer, cigarettes, sunflower seeds, drinks, bottled water, soda, sausages, and various snacks were all swept into his ring as well. These supplies had become rare commodities in the outside world. Nowadays, people would fight to the death over a loaf of bread. Ethan knew that stockpiling these resources would come in handy one day. Once everything was taken care of, the three zombie underlings finished their dinner. They circled around Nina, with the female zombie even patting her on the head from time to time, as if teasing a small pet. Nina curled up into a ball, trembling all over, her face pale. She had never imagined that one day she would be surrounded by zombies, treated like a plaything. "Let's go," Ethan commanded. The female zombie gave Nina's head one last pat before reluctantly turning to leave. Nina was nearly scared out of her mind. She couldn't fathom that her future would involve living alongside these zombies. Her heart was filled with fear and unease. "Be boss, you're not going to kill me, right?" she asked cautiously. Ethan nodded, feeling in a good mood today. He decided to mess with her a little. "Did you forget? I used to run a farm." "Huh?" Nina looked confused, not understanding what he meant. Was he treating her like livestock? They left the campus, with Nina volunteering to be the driver. She drove the truck, carrying Ethan and his zombie underlings away. She knew that the only way to avoid being killed was to prove her usefulness. Nina had driven trucks before when she worked at a supermarket, so she was familiar with this vehicle. She drove carefully, trying to keep the ride as smooth as possible. In the back, Bulldozer seemed satisfied with her driving skills, giving her an imaginary 5-star review. The streets were still a mess, with scattered zombies wandering around, but they posed no threat to the truck. However, as they approached an intersection, they saw a heavy truck parked ahead. Inside were two middle-aged men, both looking gaunt and starving. One of them, a bearded man, held half a cigarette in his hand, sniffing it repeatedly, but too reluctant to light it. "Damn it," Didn't Tony go out to find supplies? Why isn't he back yet? The bearded man grumbled. He's probably been eaten by zombies. No word for this long? He's definitely done for, the skinny man next to him said coldly. The bearded man shook his head. No way. Jake said he got through to Tony's phone, but no one answered. I bet the bastard ditched his wife and ran off. Forget about him. We need to figure out how to get some food. I'm starving, the skinny man said, frowning. The bearded man kept sniffing his cigarette and sighed. Where are we supposed to find food? Everything's been looted already. Wait. Just as they were talking, they heard the sound of an engine in the distance. Looking in the direction of the noise, they saw a truck slowly approaching from side road. The two middle-aged men were clearly seasoned veterans, the kind who could tell, just from the tire pressure and the way the truck moved, that it was carrying a heavy load, clearly packed with supplies. Well, looks like dinner just delivered itself, the skinny man said, a glint of greed flashing in his eyes. The bearded man with a scruffy face licked his cracked lips, his gaze tinged with anticipation. Let's hope there's some cigarettes in there. As the truck drew closer, they got a better look, and what they saw made their eyes light up. Sitting in the driver's seat was a young, beautiful woman. Huh, looks like today's our lucky day, the skinny man said with a sinister grin. Without hesitation, he started up their massive truck, slammed on the gas, and swerved into the middle of the road, completely blocking the smaller truck's path. Screech! Nina's heart jumped as the truck suddenly barreled into her path. She slammed on the brakes, the screech of tires echoing down the empty street. The truck skidded to a halt, leaving a long black streak on the asphalt. When it finally stopped, it was less than 2 feet away from the massive truck blocking the road. That was close. Nina exhaled, patting her chest as she tried to calm her racing heart. But the sudden stop had consequences. The jolt sent Bulldozer, who was in the back of the truck, slamming into the wall of the cargo hold with a loud thud. Bulldozer, who had been relatively satisfied with Nina's driving up until now, immediately changed his mind. In his head, her 5-star rating just dropped to a solid 1 star. Ethan, on the other hand, remained unervingly calm. Leaning back in his seat, he glanced out the window with a detached expression, as if he'd seen this coming from a mile away. Sure enough, 2 men jumped down from the massive truck. Their arms were wrapped in duct tape and newspaper, and they were holding steel pipes stained with dry blood. Their faces were twisted into malicious grins. Get out of the truck, both of you, the bearded man barked, his voice dripping with menace. Nina's eyes darted between the 2 men, and in an instant, she understood their intentions. In this post-apocalyptic world, cannibalism wasn't exactly unheard of. People would do anything to survive, no matter how depraved. What do we do, boss? She asked, her voice trembling as she turned to Ethan. Ethan didn't answer right away. His gaze swept over the 2 men, his brow furrowing slightly. Their makeshift armor and weapons reminded him of Tony, the guy who'd trashed his supermarket a while back. These 2 were probably part of the same gang. He glanced toward a nearby construction site in the distance, and a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Let them handle it, he said casually, clearly unimpressed by the 2 men. The 2 middle-aged men, oblivious to the danger they were walking into, were too busy eyeing the truck like it was a jackpot. Their smug grins grew wider as they approached. Hey there, sweetheart, don't be scared. I'll make sure to take good care of you, the skinny man sneered, his tone dripping with malice as he leered at Nina. But inside the truck's cargo hold, something stirred. A female zombie slowly lifted her head. Her stiff neck creaked as she turned toward the sound, her lifeless eyes suddenly gleaming with excitement. Sweetheart, she muttered, her voice low and raspy, as if she were trying to remember something. Take care of me. The words triggered a faint, fragmented memory in her decaying mind. She longed for warmth. She longed to be taken care of. Without hesitation, she shoved the cargo door open and leapt out of the truck. The skinny man, who had just raised a steel pipe to smash the truck's window, froze in surprise when the door swung open on its own. For a moment, he was stunned. Then his grin grew even wider, his expression turning even more vile. Well, aren't you eager? If you behave, maybe I'll let you live. Behave? A strange, eerie laugh suddenly echoed in his ears. The skinny man's grin froze. Slowly, he turned his head and found himself face to face with a pale, twisted figure. Her face was gaunt, her skin stretched tight over her bones, and her lips were curled into a grotesque smile. "Take care," the zombie rasped, her voice low and guttural, sending chills down his spine. Before he could react, she moved. In a blur of motion, she lunged at him with inhuman speed, her figure almost a shadow as she closed the distance in an instant. Holy SH! The skinny man barely had time to curse before she tackled him to the ground. The force of the impact sent him skidding across the pavement, his body dragging for nearly 10 feet. "Help me, damn it!" The skinny man screamed, thrashing wildly as he called out to the bearded man. But the bearded man didn't even glance his way. His attention was entirely fixated on the back of the truck, his eyes gleaming with greed. "Cigarettes. I need cigarettes. Let me find some first," he muttered to himself, quickening his pace toward the truck's rear. "You are—" The skinny man's scream was abruptly cut off. The female zombie had sunk her teeth deep into his neck, blood spurting out in a gruesome arc. In that moment, he finally understood what it meant to be taken care of. The bearded man remained oblivious to his companion's fate. He eagerly yanked open the truck's rear doors, his mind filled with fantasies of cigarettes, booze, and food piled high inside. What greeted him, however, were two undead faces. Their eyes were hollow and cold, their mouths smeared with dried blood. The PhD zombie stood inside the truck, tilting his head slightly as he studied the bearded man with an unsettling curiosity, like a scientist examining a new specimen. His empty gaze carried a strange, chilling sense of interest that sent shivers down the man's spine. On the other hand, Bulldozer wasn't nearly as composed. His face was twisted with irritation, his eyes blazing with frustration. He was still fuming over being slammed into the truck wall earlier. In his mind, there was only one thought. This bastard is to blame? The bearded man froze, his eyes wide with terror as his body locked up like a statue. It was as if he'd been nailed to the ground. His mind went blank, unable to process the horrifying reality in front of him. Just moments ago, he'd been daydreaming about cigarettes, booze, and food. Now, that dream had been shattered. Inside the truck were two terrifying zombies. After a brief moment of stunned silence, he seemed to snap out of it. His trembling hands reached for the half-smoked cigarette tucked behind his ear. He lit it with shaky fingers, taking 2 deep drags as if the smoke could somehow calm his nerves. The cigarette smoke swirled around him, and for a fleeting moment, a faint smile of satisfaction appeared on his lips. But that satisfaction didn't last long. A pale, massive hand suddenly shot out from the truck, clamping down on his shoulder like a steel vise. The bearded man's eyes flew open in shock. Before he could even exhale the smoke from his mouth, the hand yanked him into the truck with brutal force. Bang! The truck's rear doors slammed shut. Within seconds, the street fell eerily silent. From the driver's seat, Nina glanced at the scene through the rearview mirror. She couldn't help but purse her lips and shake her head. What a mess, just pathetic. Seriously, who's dumb enough to block my boss's truck? Her tone carried a hint of schadenfreude, but mostly it was laced with exasperation at the sheer stupidity of the two men. At that moment, Ethan finally spoke. His voice was calm and commanding, carrying an air of quiet authority. "Let's go. Head to that construction site up ahead." Nina blinked, momentarily surprised, but quickly nodded. "Oh, okay." She didn't ask any questions. As a loyal employee, she knew her role. Go where the boss says and don't pry into things that don't concern her. She restarted the truck, carefully steering around the abandoned vehicle blocking the road, and drove toward the construction site. The construction site was surrounded by blue corrugated metal fencing, though the main gate had long since collapsed, leaving the area looking desolate and abandoned. The ground was littered with mangled zombie corpses, their limbs twisted and broken, with bloodstains splattered across the dirt in a grotesque display. The truck followed a set of tire tracks etched into the ground, leading deeper into the site. Nina gripped the steering wheel tightly, her brows furrowing as she surveyed the scene. "This place doesn't feel right," she muttered under her breath. Ethan didn't respond. His cold gaze swept across the area, his mind working quickly. It was clear that this construction site had once been a survivor stronghold, and a sizable one at that. The gang that had attacked his supermarket, Tony and the two men from earlier, were almost certainly from here. There won't be a third time. Ethan's lips curled into a faint, icy smirk. He had already made up his mind. This stronghold needed to be wiped out completely. He couldn't afford to let them keep harassing him. As soon as the truck came to a stop, the three zombies in the back wasted no time. They leapt out with startling agility, their movements quick and precise. Their faces were alight with a strange, almost gleeful excitement, as if they could already sense the presence of prey nearby. "Following the boss was the best decision I ever made," Bulldozer muttered, licking his lips as his eyes gleamed with bloodlust. He was practically salivating at the thought of fresh meat. "Every time, we find something good to eat." The PhD zombie, in contrast, remained calm and composed. He stood still, his gaze sweeping over the surroundings as if he were analyzing the environment. A faint, enigmatic smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. The construction site was deathly silent, the air thick with the stench of decay. The ground was strewn with the remains of zombies that had been beaten to death, their bodies crushed and broken. It was clear that the survivors here had been well organized and capable, having cleared out the immediate threats in the area. Ahead of the truck loomed an unfinished building, its gray concrete walls riddled with cracks. The skeletal structure of the building gave it a bleak, desolate appearance. But in one corner of the site stood something unusual. It was a three-story structure made entirely of reinforced concrete. The walls were thick and impenetrable, with no windows to speak of. Even the entrance was sealed with a heavy stainless steel door, devoid of any glass. The only openings were a few fist-sized ventilation holes, giving the building an ominously fortified look. Nina stared at the structure, muttering under her breath, "This place looks like a fortress." Ethan nodded slightly, his eyes narrowing as a cold glint flashed across them. Clearly, this building had been deliberately constructed as a defense against zombies. With the zombies' innate sharp senses, Ethan had already picked up on the commotion inside the building. Faintly, he could also smell a strong scent of blood, as if something unusual had happened in there. His three zombie underlings clearly sensed the presence of prey as well. A gleam of excitement flashed in their eyes, like starving predators catching the scent of fresh blood. Without needing a signal, they all bolted toward the fortress-like building, their movements swift and feral. Inside that building, a group of survivors had indeed gathered. There were about a dozen of them, including a few construction workers, some streetwise thugs, and a construction site's developer, Warren Whitaker. Warren Whitaker wasn't just anyone to Ethan. He was an old acquaintance. Not only had Warren once bought out Ethan's farm, but he'd also loaned Ethan money before the apocalypse, a debt that had since become a thorn in Ethan's side. When the apocalypse broke out, Warren had been inspecting the construction site with his crew. After realizing zombies were attacking, he quickly organized his men and used steel and concrete to build a sturdy fortress. By sheer luck, they survived the initial chaos and made it this far. Now, Warren was still the leader of this fortress. He, along with his trusted right-hand man Damian Flint and a few loyal enforcers, held the fate of the survivors firmly in their hands. "Warren, none of the people we sent out have come back," Damian said, frowning, his voice tinged with unease. Warren's expression darkened. He knew that while the fortress was solid, their supplies were a serious problem. The food had long run out, and everyone was so hungry their ribs were practically touching. Even walking had become a struggle. "If it really comes to it," Warren muttered, hesitating, "we might have to eat some human meat to get through this. But I'm not sure if it'll cause prion disease." "Boss, it shouldn't," a bespectacled woman interjected. She was Warren's secretary, calm, and intelligent. From my research, prion diseases only develop after a person dies. So, as long as we're eating live humans, we should be fine. Her tone was disturbingly calm, as if she were discussing something as mundane as the weather. Damien frowned at her words and suggested, "Warren, why don't I take some guys out to scavenge for food? We can't just sit here starving." Warren shook his head. "No, it's too dangerous out there. Relax, Warren. Back in my street fighting days, I took down 3 blocks with just a kukri in hand and didn't even blink. These zombies? They're nothing compared to real people." Warren looked up at Damien and suddenly asked, "You didn't blink? Didn't your eyes get dry?" Damien was momentarily speechless. He'd been bragging about his combat skills, only to be completely thrown off by Warren's deadpan question. Just then, the low rumble of an engine echoed from outside. "There's a car coming in." Damien's eyes lit up. "Warren, it might be Tom and the others coming back." Warren perked up as well, quickly standing and heading toward the fortress's main gate. His heart was filled with hope. They might have brought back food. The fortress's gate was made of thick stainless steel, incredibly sturdy. There were a few fist-sized ventilation holes in the door, allowing for airflow and a view of the outside. Warren and Damien leaned against the holes, peering out. But what they saw wasn't Tom. It was a group of terrifying zombies. A female zombie's face suddenly appeared right in front of one of the holes. Her lips curled into a twisted grin, her eyes brimming with bloodthirsty madness. Her face was only inches away from theirs, separated by the steel door, making the sight all the more chilling. Holy shit! Warren and Damien stumbled backward in fright, nearly falling to the ground. "What the hell? How are there zombies here?" "Don't panic, Warren," Damien said, trying to steady himself. "This door is solid. They can't get in." Warren nodded, taking a deep breath to calm himself. But the next moment, a violent crash echoed through the air. Bang! 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 Bulldozer swung his massive fists, hammering the steel gate with relentless force. Each punch landed like a sledgehammer, shaking the entire building to its core. The survivors inside the fortress were startled by the commotion and rushed to the gate, eager to see what was happening outside. "Rayark!" Bulldozer let out a deep, guttural roar. Despite his monstrous strength, the specially reinforced steel gate held firm. After a few more punches, he stopped, stepping back obediently to stand behind Ethan, waiting for his leader's next move. He glanced at Ethan expectantly, as if hoping he'd pull out that mysterious little stick again to open the door. "Is this zombie mutated or something?" Warren's voice trembled. "How can it be this strong?" "Relax," Damien waved dismissively. "Even if it were a dinosaur, it wouldn't get through this door. Unless, of course, the zombies suddenly learn how to operate a bulldozer and dig their way in." Warren nodded, feeling slightly reassured. He leaned back toward the ventilation hole, peering outside to get a better look. This time, he saw a young man. The man stood silently outside, his gaze cold and piercing, flanked by 3 eerie-looking zombies. "Is that Ethan?" Warren squinted through the hole, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the figure standing outside. Even though Ethan had clearly turned into a zombie, Warren would never forget that face. A wave of complicated emotions surged through him. This was the same guy who had sold him a farm before the apocalypse and borrowed $80 million in loans. Now that the world had ended, the money was obviously gone, but the thought of that massive debt still made Warren's chest tighten with frustration. "Serves you right. Turn into a zombie, huh? That's karma," Warren muttered under his breath, his tone laced with schadenfreude. Still, he couldn't help but notice that even as a zombie, Ethan somehow managed to look as clean and put together as ever. Damien, standing beside him, remained calm. "Warren, forget about them. This door's solid. They're not getting in. Let them mess around out there. They'll probably give up and leave after a while." Warren nodded, thinking that made sense. He stepped away from the gate and returned to his chair, trying to relax. But outside, Ethan showed no intention of leaving. He stood motionless in front of the building, his icy gaze fixed on it like a predator sizing up its prey. The steel gate, though sturdy, was nothing to him now. With his current strength, a single punch would be enough to blow a hole clean through it. But Ethan didn't plan to do that. The reason was simple. He didn't want to get his clothes dirty. Instead, he raised his hand and gave a small wave. In the next moment, a faint glimmer of light flashed, and from his spatial storage ring emerged a massive metal machine. It was an excavator. Ethan had brought it from his farm before the apocalypse. He'd thought it would be useless in this new world, but it turned out to be just what he needed today. Vroom! The engine roared to life, the deafening sound echoing through the air. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat, calmly operating the steel beast as it rumbled toward the fortress. The fortress's reinforced concrete walls were tough, but Ethan didn't plan to destroy them outright. His goal was to dig a tunnel beneath the building and enter from below. Inside the fortress, Warren and the others quickly noticed the noise outside. "What's that sound?" Warren frowned, standing up and walking back to the gate with Damien. They peered through the ventilation holes again, only to see a massive excavator slowly approaching. "What the?" Everyone froze. An excavator? Warren's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The idea that zombies could operate heavy machinery was beyond his comprehension. Damien's expression was even more priceless. He just joked about zombies needing a bulldozer to break in, and now, right before his eyes, was a zombie driving an excavator. "Are these zombies graduates from UTI?" he muttered, utterly dumbfounded. Under Ethan's control, the excavator's massive bucket began digging into the ground. Each swing of the steel bucket tore up huge chunks of earth. Before long, a large pit had formed in front of the fortress gate. Inside the fortress, the ground began to crack. In some places, it even started to collapse, allowing sunlight to stream in through the gaps. The survivors inside grew increasingly uneasy. They're really digging their way in. Warren's face turned pale. He never imagined that the fortress he had painstakingly built would be breached by a single excavator. "Grab your weapons. Get ready to fight." Damien whipped around and shouted at the people behind him. The survivors inside the fortress sprang into action. Construction workers, street thugs, even Warren's secretary, all of them grabbed whatever they could use as a weapon. Someone picked up a steel pipe. Another pulled out a machete. One person even hefted a double-barreled shotgun. And then there was the most over-the-top of them all. Someone dragged out a chainsaw, revving it up with a loud whir. Their weapons might have been a chaotic mix, but their sheer numbers and determination made for an intimidating sight. "Yeah, let's take them on."